Do you need the latest high dollar rod if you want to catch more trout? And what about all those bougie waders you keep seeing ads for? And is it finally time to break down and learn how to Euro nymph, since apparently that's the only way to catch tons of fish? The truth is, fly fishing is a lot simpler than it often appears, and you don't need a pile of the latest and greatest gear to catch fish. This week on Untangled, we're going to bust some of the most common gear myths out there so you can focus on what's most important, putting flies in front of fish and making them look real. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant. My apologies if I sound a little hoarse today. I got sick last week. Lost my voice, actually, and I was worried this episode of Untangled wasn't going to happen. I had Alex on standby to fill in for me, and he's been prepping. In fact, I probably should have told him I didn't need him to do it. No, I emptied all the local stores of all of their cough drops and their NyQuil, so I'm back to roughly the same as I was before I got sick. But apologies if the voice doesn't sound as luscious and wonderful as it usually does. But we're talking about gear this week, and gear myths in particular, because there's this pervasive mythology in fly fishing that is really, it's a huge impediment to the success of beginners. And what this mythology tells you is that you have to do everything a certain way, and you've got to use certain gear if you want the best possible outcome. And if you color outside those lines at all, you're doing it wrong. Now, I hope I've done a good job on this show of dispelling that bullcrap, because that's what it is. It's just not true. The only thing that you need to focus on is what I've been harping on all year here on the show, and that is put your flies in front of fish and make them look real. That's your job as an angler. How you choose to accomplish that is completely up to you. And before anybody sharpens their pitchforks or lights their torches to come after me in the comments section, yes, there is a right and a wrong way to fly fish, in the sense that your technique can be off, so your presentation is off, so you're not catching fish. That is what we focus on trying to fix here at Untangled and everything else we do here at VFC. Your dry flies could have drag on them. Your nymphs could not be deep enough. Your streamer retrieve could be too fast or too slow. Those are all technique issues that can easily be fixed and remedied, and they don't require you to drop a mortgage payment on a new fly rod or new waders, okay? So keep this in mind as we go through this show today, and as you go through fly fishing in general, is that it's not the gear that makes the angler. It's not any of that stuff. It really boils down to your ability to use what you've got to the fullest extent. Okay. And there's I don't know, there's enough myths out there. I could probably do 10 episodes just like this one, but I picked 5 of the most common that we hear about the most from anglers. And that's what we're going to focus on today. And the first one, myth number 1, is that you need hundreds of thousands of maybe, you need at least 1 billion flies to be successful. I mean, if you show up to the river and you don't have 18 fly boxes spilling out of your vest, why'd you even show up? That's like me showing up to eat wings without a bib, right? I wasn't prepared. No, I don't need a bib for wings anymore. I thankfully figured out how to eat in public without looking like a complete fool. And you don't need millions of flies to show up to the river either. This really is one of the top questions that we hear from anglers and beginners. And I definitely understand it, because there are bajillions of flies out there. You walk into a fly shop or you browse online, and it's never completely clear what flies you need and then why you need them. There's just so much out there for you to pick from that it gets very overwhelming very quickly. And so a lot of beginners assume they just need, well, I guess I'll take one of everything. And here's the reality to that. I carry, on an average day to the river, probably 24 different patterns, and I have maybe 4 or 5 of each. So I don't have, well, I'm not very good at math, which shouldn't surprise anybody. So I've got maybe, a couple hundred flies, which sounds like a lot, but when you stick them into your fly boxes, that's maybe 2 or 3 fly boxes. I've got them spread out a little bit more just because I like my flies organized, but I really don't carry too many with me to the river. And that's because I understand one of the key concepts in fly fishing, and that'd be hatch timings.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you're new to fly fishing and not quite sure what gear you really need, you're not alone. It can be hard to know what gear actually matters and what's just marketing hype. That's why we've put together our fly fishing gear checklist. It clearly outlines the most important gear that every fly angler needs in their pack without the fluff. Snag a free copy by scanning the QR code on the screen or hit the link in the show notes. All right, back to Untangled.
Different aquatic insects are going to hatch at different times of the year, and that's going to influence what the fish are eating. So you've got your mayflies that come off in the spring. Then you've got your stoneflies and your caddis in the early summer. You've got some more mayflies that'll come off in the summer as well. And then hoppers start becoming part of a fish's diet late summer, early fall. And then mayflies show up again to close out the fall and into the very beginning of winter. And then your midges are going to hatch year-round. And then your bugs like your worms, your scuds, and your sow bugs, they're also available year-round. So I only carry with me the flies that I need to match what should be hatching on any given day. So I'm not carrying, it's late summer right now, so I don't have stoneflies with me right now because the stonefly hatch is well over. They're not out and about, so I don't need them. I don't have them in my box at this time of year. But 2-ish months ago, I had to do some more math again to figure out what month it would have been 2 months ago. But 2 months ago, I had nothing, almost nothing but stoneflies in the box because that is what was on the menu for the fish at that time, okay? So right now, into summer, what's in my box? Well, I've got a bunch of hopper patterns in my box because the fish are going nuts on them. In fact, I was out last night exploring some of the creek by where I live because I think we all fall into that where we fish the same runs, we fish the same spots, and I've been trying to push myself to explore more. So I went to a section I'd never fished before, and I saw this fish. Oh my goodness. The thing was huge. I still can't believe it. I don't think Alex believes me either because he's fished this little creek with me before. And most of the fish are, 10 to 13 inch brown trout. And this brown came up to eat my hopper and it was easy 20 inches, if not bigger. Honestly, it almost scared me. It was so big. I was like, and I was all by myself. And of course I lost it, so I don't have any proof, but you got to take my word for it. But anyways, I've got hoppers because they're eating hoppers. That big one ate the hopper. And then I've also got some midge and some caddis nymphs and a few caddis adults and midge adults as well, just in case one of those hatches comes off. And there were quite a few caddis actually coming off last night. I almost switched over to caddis instead of that hopper, but after that big brown ate the hopper, I kept it on, and I'm kind of glad that I did. But that's what's still active in my fisheries. So that's why I've got those flies with me. Okay, your fisheries might be slightly different. You might be ahead, you might be behind, you might have different bugs going on. So it pays to look up information about hatches. There's tons of information about that online, especially that are specific to your fisheries. You'll be able to find that stuff online. Or if you've got a local fly shop, they'll have a bunch of resources there to help you as well. And then we've also got a year-round hatch chart that will help you know what flies should be hatching in your area, roughly what time of the year. So I'll throw a link to that in the show notes or on the screen. If you're watching the video podcast, you can grab that hatch chart. And then we've also got the fly collections here at VFC. We put them together so that you've got a little bit of everything that you need all throughout the year. So if the only stuff you have is one of our fly collections, you're going to be covered for a lot of different situations. In fact, just about every situation, you're going to be covered with something from one of our fly collections. So the gist of it really is this. You don't need a million different flies. You just need a few different versions of the bugs that are actively hatching right now, and that should be more than enough to get you through a day on the water. You got to do a little bit of research to figure out what those are, but that's part of fly fishing. You are doing something that's, to a lot of us, very brand new. Even if you've come from conventional fishing, you probably didn't spend a lot of time worrying about the bugs. you just, what baits are working, what lures are working, and going that way. And there's nothing wrong with that approach at all. That's a great, fun, exciting way to fish, but it's different in fly fishing. You're learning a whole new language, a whole new skill set. So give yourself some grace, but give yourself some time as well to learn that so that you can be successful at it. So that's myth number one. Myth number two is that you need an expensive fly rod. If you want to catch that really picky fish on a dry fly, then I've got a $1,200 USA made stick here for you that it'll practically cast itself, to be honest. They're so good these days. No. This is a myth that I'm guilty of perpetuating myself, and I fully own up to that. I've got a collection of fly rods that's kind of embarrassing. I mean, shoot, in this podcast studio right now, there's probably north of 40 rods, which is, it's out of control. I've got a problem. But a lot of my fly rods are more expensive. They're definitely not cheap. I particularly love the really old Winstons from the IM6 and pre-IM6 days. And I just love fly rods in general. And I love them so much. I love those old Winstons so much that it was a fight for the longest time for Alex to get me to use our fly flinger here at VFC. But started using it a lot more. And not just recently, but when I first started here, started using it a lot more. And I actually tried really hard this summer to just use the fly flinger. And I've grown a lot more fond of it, in all honesty. It really is a super solid rod. And it's the only rod that Alex uses too. And he outfishes me a lot of the time anyways. So that really does go to the point that it's not the rod, right? It's how you use it. The difference between a rod like our fly flinger and my favorite Winston, we'll just use that as an example. And this really goes for any comparison between your more budget-friendly rods and your high-end, very expensive rods, is primarily the weight and then the torsional stability. So torsional stability is just the ability of the fly rod to stay straight when you're casting it back and forth. The best rods, they don't move too much side to side, because if the rod moves too much side to side during the cast, that's actually going to introduce more movement into your loop, and that's going to decrease your accuracy. So the rod's just not going to be as accurate. It's not going to be as crisp of a casting tool as it could be. So the best rods stay very straight. They've got a lot of good torsional stability. And then the cheaper rods, they usually don't stay as straight. They're not using as expensive materials to be built with. So you lose a little bit of torsional stability. You lose a little bit of inherent accuracy. You lose a little bit of that crispness. And then the weight. But honestly, the weight, you really are only going to notice that $1,000 fly rod is super light if you're holding it next to your cheaper rod. That's really the only time you're going to notice the weight difference. And that's really the only time I notice the weight difference either. So it's not something that should stop you from using that rod. These high dollar rods, they are excellent tools. There's no getting around that, but they throw the same line and the same flies that the fly flinger does. Okay. The thing that with fly rods that doesn't get talked about enough, and a lot of what endears them to us, is there's just an intangible feeling, an emotion that you associate with a lot of rods, and it really grows with that rod over time, in my experience. My favorite rod ever is my favorite because of all the memories I have with it. It's not the lightest rod I own. It's not the most inherently accurate rod I own. It's not objectively the best rod that I own. But I just love fishing with it. It was the first expensive rod I bought for myself. and I've fished it everywhere from Alaska, all over the Rockies, out to Colorado. I love, love, love that rod. So when you ask someone, like, well, why do I need an expensive rod? You're often given this laundry list of the feelings that rod evokes from that person. It's crisp, it's smooth, it's fun, it's intuitive. They're all characteristics that are subjective. They're not objective. Okay, the only real objective one would be, well, it's light. And yeah, okay, you can measure that, but do you measure how crisp or smooth or fun a rod is? No, that's going to change from person to person, okay? The only objective truth, again, is that these expensive rods tend to be a bit lighter, a bit better with their torsional stability. And yeah, they'll have nicer cork, they'll have nicer guides, they'll have nicer reel seat hardware, but does that catch fish for you? No, it doesn't, okay? It's just a nicer tool at the end of the day. So the bottom line is that you do not need that expensive rod if you want to be a great angler. You don't even need it if you want to catch those picky, tough fish, okay? Earlier this summer, Alex and I were out fishing, and we were on a tailwater, which is very technical water, and there's a fish rising to PMDs, pale morning dun mayflies, and crystal clear water, low, slow moving, everything that makes for a very picky dry fly fishing experience. Alex strings up the fly flinger, puts a PMD on, first cast, nails, I think it was almost a 23-inch rainbow on a dry fly. It was amazing to watch. And he did that all with the fly flinger. Okay? You don't need these expensive rods. They evoke some of that fun intangibility to it, but you don't need them. Okay? And again, Alex frequently outfishes me, and the only rod he ever uses is the fly flinger. The best anglers that I know are the ones who can just pick up any rod and catch fish with it, because to them, the rod is just a tool for getting the job done. Okay? Think of it, let's throw it to golf terms for a minute. Could Scotty Scheffler still win a golf tournament with bargain clubs? Probably, because the dude just understands how to be a great golfer. Okay? It is the same idea with fly rods. Myth number 3 is that you need a fancy reel. Now, this myth really applies mostly to trout fishing, although I'd say it's probably true for panfish and to an extent bass fishing as well. If you're fishing for pike, muskie, carp, any saltwater fishing, salmon, you're going to want a really nice reel for all of that. And that just means, a good machined aluminum reel that's light, has a nice strong drag. It's not made from plastic. But for the majority of trout fishing, your reel is a fancy line holder that you will rarely use to its fullest extent. And I know folks are going to come at me in the comments for that, and feel free. It's my opinion, but I've got it backed up here with a lot of stuff. Okay, when I call a reel a fancy line holder, what I mean is that it's incredibly rare to run into a trout that requires you to crank your drag as tight as it will go. And for that drag and for that reel to be the deciding factor in whether you land that fish or not. It's very rare you're going to use these trout reels to their fullest extent, okay? Because any decent disc drag reel is going to provide plenty of resistance for the majority of trout fishing. And a disc drag, that just refers to the drag system, so what applies tension to the line as it goes off of the reel. You've got disc drag, which is going to be your strongest, the most adjustable, and then you've got a click pawl reel. And click pawl reels just use little gears and pawls that provide a little bit of resistance. Sometimes they'll have a spring in them that you can adjust a little bit, but they don't. It's usually a preset amount of resistance on your click pawl reels. The disc drag reels, you can really crank those down to put some stopping power on the fish. But for years, click pawl reels are all we used. That's all fly fishing had, and caught plenty of big fish. we always hear about the good old days, about how big the fish used to be. Well, they were using those old click pawl Fluger Medalist reels to land them. Okay. I even used for years and years and years, my go-to reel was an Able TR2, a click pawl reel. And I used that to land a fair number of big fish, especially on the Green River. When I lived in Utah, that's all I ever fished was the Green. And I that little Able TR2, I was landing 20, 21, 22 inch rainbows and browns with that reel all the time. The reel, there's going to be instances where you're going to need it, but especially in trout fishing, you're never going to use that disc drag reel to its fullest extent. Okay. You don't need a reel that can stop a freight train. Your reel is part of how you land fish. It is a valuable tool for fighting fish. Whether it's a big fish or whether it's a medium-sized fish in heavy current, but it's not the deciding factor. Okay, what matters is that your reel engages smoothly and you can easily adjust the drag. If you can do that, you'll be fine, because then it gives you that extra bit of power, that extra bit of lever to stop the fish from running. Okay, the super cheap reels are a waste of cash because their drag is often really rough. When you go to adjust it down, you usually don't have a big adjustment range either. And then when the fish takes line, there's a little bit of a hitch where it kind of bounces. It's not smooth. You want that smooth, okay? Because if it hitches or it bounces at all, that can introduce slack into your line, which can end up breaking your leader or popping the fly right out of the fish's mouth. And then those cheaper reels too, you drop them, they bend, they break really easily. In fact, I was just out playing with a new rod and reel setup that a company sent for review, and I dropped their reel. And I've dropped plenty of reels. And the spool bent, and I've never bent a spool before, but it was a fairly cheap reel. So the really cheap stuff, you want to stay away from that. But when I say really cheap, I'm talking like the $20, $30 stuff that you see. Because you can get a smooth drag and a nice reel for around $100 these days. And that'll be more than enough drag and reel than you will need. It'll be able to put the brakes on a fish when they do run. But again, it's very rare that reel is going to be the deciding factor in whether or not you land that fish. So that was myth number 3. Myth number 4. There's only one right way to rig up. There's this, we get this a lot, where people will ask if, oh, well, I want to rig my flies up this way. Is that okay? Or I want to do my dry dropper. Should I tie the dropper off the bend of the hook or off the eye of the dry fly hook? Should I use tags when I'm setting up my nymph rig? Okay, we get questions like this all the time. Well, which one should I do? Which one's the best? Well, it really just kind of depends, right? I love to say that on the show, but it does depend. Okay, I prefer to keep my rig simple. So I tie my dropper off the bend of the hook instead of using the eye, because I think that makes the dry fly float better. I think it casts better. And I think it gives you a more direct connection to your nymph that way. It's also simpler. It's how I learned to do it. Okay. Tandem nymph rigs. I love tying nymphs off the bend of each hook instead of using tags, because I want that direct connection to my flies. And to that end, I think indicator nymphing is, as a whole, I think it's going to be a little bit more effective than Euro nymphing, because Euro or tight line nymphing it's a bit limited in its reach and its application. You can't really fish it from a boat very well. You can't fish it at the long distances that you can fish an indicator rig at. But it's a lot more sensitive. It's a lot more, you feel a lot more with that rig, but you got to be a little bit closer. So there's trade-offs with every setup. I'm not trashing Euro or tightline nymphing at all. I'm just, there's trade-offs, and I think indicator nymphing is a little bit more effective because you can do a bit more with it. But that's kind of getting into the weeds here, okay? Because these are just my opinions and my own way of fishing. These are opinions that I've developed over 20 years of fly fishing. The only thing that makes any of what I said wrong, or any of how you choose to do it wrong, is that if you rig up in such a way that your flies don't look real anymore, it hampers your ability to cast, or if you just don't enjoy fishing that way, or if you get tons of tangles when you cast it, okay? That's the only time that it's wrong to rig up a certain way, okay? The key is figuring out a rigging system that works well for you, that presents your flies in a way that makes them look real, and then spend tons of time honing your skills with that rig. but there's not one rig or one way to set your flies up that's inherently better than the other. And this is another hill I'll plant my flag on this hill too, because Alex will go out and he likes to fish tandem nymph rigs a lot of the time, or his nymphs on a tag system. Sorry. So he'll have his leader, surgeon's knot with a tag coming off and a nymph. Leader going down, another surgeon's knot, tag coming off and a nymph. And then he'll either have a heavy nymph on the bottom or some split shot to get it down. So he'll have that tag system set up. And he really likes fishing that way. And it's very effective for him. He can cast that rig very well. He hands it to me. I cast it, and it's just a tangled mess because I fish tandem nymph rigs. And that's what I've spent a lot of my time doing and honing my skills on, is that sort of nymph rig. So is one of us right and one of us wrong? No. It comes down to, what are we trying to accomplish, and are we accomplishing it in a way that we enjoy? That's the only right or wrong way to setting up your flies. So thanks for coming to my TED Talk on that one. And myth number 5 is that you've got to spend some big money on waders. You want to be a fly angler? You want to be a real one? Like you could have an Instagram account, real one. Well, you got to go drop some Benjamins on some waders. And honestly, for a long time, I believed this myth. I bought into it wholeheartedly. But lately, I've had 2 very expensive pairs of waders leak on me after not very many days on the water. And the most reliable pair of waders that I own right now retails for $600. Now, that's a lot of money. I'm not saying it's not, but it's certainly a lot less than the $1,000 it's being asked for some of the top waders on the market right now. $600, a lot cheaper than $1,000. Okay. But here's the thing to understand about waders. Every single pair of them is going to wear out eventually. It is the piece of gear you buy knowing you will replace it. And that's sometimes a hard jump to make, because we don't really assume that with our reels and with our rods, because they're more tangible is not the right word. They just have that longer lasting feel to them. Then you spend that much money on waders. You spend $300-$400 on waders. You think, I'm going to get a lot of use out of them. Yeah, you will, but eventually they're going to leak. Okay. Now you might hear these anglers say, I've had these waders for 10 years and they don't leak. Okay. Well, my follow-up question to that is, how many days a year do you fish? 5, 10, maybe? Okay. That's 100 days of use on those waders max. And yeah, they shouldn't leak in that time period. You should be able to get out 100 times in them before you have some serious problems. Now, expensive waders should last a bit longer than the cheaper ones. They're made from better quality materials. The seams are bound better. They usually come with a good warranty, so they're a lot more expensive because of that. And usually, a lot of the companies are great about replacing them. Squala, who we support a lot of their gear here at VFC. We love using their stuff. Squala's great with their warranty service at taking care of you. But honestly, I'd still kind of be hard pressed to spend more than $600 on a pair of waders, because I don't think the price difference at that point, after $600, I don't think that they're worth the extra money, because all you're paying for at that point is more pockets or zip front waders. There's not really a huge increase in performance. In my opinion and in my experience past that point, they're really just, you're just paying for more features after the $600 mark. So again, your waders are going to break. I'm not going to tell you if you should buy your cheap ones or you should buy your expensive ones. You can get whatever you want, but you don't need the really expensive ones, because they're all going to leak eventually. So you'll get wet at some point, no matter what pair you buy. The rule of thumb usually is just buy the best that you can afford, and they will last you the longer. And that tends to be true, but again, I'm kind of questioning that logic lately, but that's still probably the advice I'd give out. So, if you've got any other gear myths that you want me to bust, or you'd like me to explain in a future episode, or you've got comments on what we discussed today, drop those in the comments, because we are done with our gear myths and we are moving on to the Q&A section of this week's show. Every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourself. So if you have got a fly fishing question you would like answered, there's a link to send those in down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Our first question this week comes to us from Doug from Wisconsin, writes in and says, first of all, big thank you for the Beginners Fly Fishing series. It's been super helpful both with how to fly fish, but also building confidence while fly fishing. While on a small stream, I was catching smaller, 6 to 10 inch brown trout using a dry dropper, chubby Chernobyl with a zebra midge, but had no hits from larger fish. There were larger trout, 12 to 18 inches in the stream. I saw them in the water. What should I have done to try catching a large fish? No fish were rising. Do larger fish eat the same flies as smaller fish? Doug, this is a good question. And for those who are new to VFC, Doug was referencing our beginner fly fishing masterclass, which you can watch on YouTube for free. That's a beginner's fly fishing series he was talking about. Goes over everything you need to know to get started fly fishing. So check that out if you're new to it. But Doug, short answer to your question is yes, to a point. Big fish and small fish will have the same diet. They're going to be eating roughly the same things. When trout get pretty big, though, they do tend to have a diet that's a bit more piscivorous, and that just means they eat fish. So they'll be a bit more piscivorous than they are insect eating. Brown trout especially are known for becoming almost entirely piscivorous as they get big, although that didn't stop Alex from catching his personal best 24-inch brown trout on a Waltz worm earlier this year, and then he also caught a 25.25-inch rainbow trout on a demon midge last winter. So even when they get big, they'll still eat insects sometimes. But in the size range that you mentioned, that 12 to 18 inches, those trout are going to eat the same as smaller trout. They'll still probably eat some other fish, but insects are still a large part of their diet at that point. What tends to happen in my experience in small streams is that the small trout can be a little bit quicker to grab a bite as things drift through the hole. So sometimes you've got to pretty thoroughly work a piece of water to give the bigger fish a chance to grab it. Because those smaller fish, the biggest fish in a run, they're going to claim the best feeding lies. They're going to be in the best spot where they have to work the least to grab the most amount of food because they're the biggest. They can kind of bully their way into the best spot. The smaller fish are going to be in water that's not as good. Maybe it's a little faster. They've got to work a little bit harder. So the smaller fish, they're going to spend a bit more energy, move a bit further to eat because they're competing with those bigger fish for the same food in the same hole. They've got to get, it's in their mind. They've got to get first dibs on it. It's like, if you were at a wing restaurant and then I walked in after you, you would start stuffing your face because I'm going to eat everything in that place if you don't hurry up. Right? Or it's like if you see Alex walk into the Maverick behind you, you better get your Coke Zero because Alex is going to drain that fountain of all the Coke Zero and their limes because he's kind of bougie like that. But that really is just a theory on my part, though. This is my experience. This is my theory about the small fish and the big fish. And the small fish are going to be more aggressive because they've got to eat. They want to pack those pounds on. I think that explains why we see small fish hit flies so aggressively. And then the larger fish don't really move as much, especially in these smaller streams, because the large fish can just kind of lazily sit there in the best spot and pick off food when they want to. The small fish are trying to get big, so they're more willing to spend that energy to move around a lot and eat more. So again, just a theory on my part. I don't have anything to support that. That's just observation I think that I've made over the last 10 years or so. The key to remember here, though, is that big fish are going to get big for a reason, especially in these small streams. So unless there's a hatch going, they're really not going to move further than they need to eat. The hatches will get them to start looking up, start moving because there's a lot of food. So it's worth it to them at that point to move and eat. They're consuming way more energy than they're burning at that point. So your drifts and your presentations really need to be dialed in if you want to catch these bigger fish out of smaller streams, because you've got to get it right in front of their face sometimes. The other key to remember is that the biggest fish are often going to be your spookiest ones. They are going to be the ones who, they've gotten big because they haven't been eaten by a bird or other predator. They pay attention to their instincts and they run. They're really wise to anglers who don't have the stealthiest approach. The little fish, they might get scared, but then, they see your atoms on the water and they think, oh, I got to stuff my face. I'm going for it. And they jump on it. Okay. So working on both your presentation and your approach to the water is definitely going to help you spook these fish less often. You mentioned that you saw those fish in the stream. You didn't mention if you saw them like as they swam away from you, if they were spooked, but that could very well be part of it, is maybe you spooked them and they're not going to eat at that point. Okay. Stay low. Don't cast a big silhouette on the horizon. Watch where your shadow lands. All those little things will add up and help you start catching more of those bigger fish out of the smaller streams. So great question. Thanks a bunch for sending it in. Harrison from New York has our next question, writes in and says, this summer, I just began really diving into fly fishing for trout. I've spent a little over a year fly fishing for smallmouth and fall fish and figured it to be about the same, but boy, was I wrong. Anyways, to my question, how do I get large trout into the net? Here on the Susquehanna and Delaware, there are massive brown trout, and I seem to be able to hook into them with ease, but the tricky part is fighting them. Every time I hook into a large trout, I end up snapping off because I don't know how to guide it away from logs or underwater objects. How do I steer trout away from debris while fighting? And how do I stop snapping lines on these tanks? Harrison, good question. So without fishing with you, it's hard to say exactly what the issue might be, but I'm going to go out on a limb and assume, because you're newer to the sport, you're probably fighting these fish with your rod tip straight up in the air, because we're taught as beginners to keep the rod tip up, tip high, tip high. You hear that all the time. And for good reason, because you need to keep that tip straight up in the air to keep tension on the line. And the easiest way to remind you to keep tension on the line so that the fly doesn't come out of the fish's mouth is by keeping that tip nice and sky high. Okay. If you lose tension, that fly is just going to pop right out, especially on bigger fish. But what you need to do with bigger fish especially is you need to utilize the butt and the mid sections of your fly rod. That's where all your lifting and pulling power of the fly rod is located. So to do that, if your rod tip is straight up in the air, the only part of the rod that's really exerting any pressure on that fish is the tip section. Okay. If you want to engage the mid and the butt section of the rod, what you got to do is you got to end up turning your rod to the side a little bit. And you want the curve of the rod to be pointing opposite the direction that the trout is moving. Then you've got side pressure now. You've got the butt section, the mid section that you can use to really pull that fish in. Then the tip is still going to be soft. It's still going to protect your tippet. But you can use that side pressure to pull and move fish away from those sticks and those rocks, like you mentioned, and that's not going to break your tippet either. Because at this point, the rod is doing all that hard work of pulling the fish, but the tip is doing its job of being soft and supple. It's absorbing all those head shakes so that your tippet and your leader don't snap. This side pressure is key. It is the key to fighting these big fish. And you'll actually be surprised at how much pressure you can really put on a fish. Even on 5X tippet, you can really put some pressure on these fish. Those big fish that Alex caught that I mentioned earlier, the big brown and rainbow, he caught them on 4X tippet on a 5-weight. Caught both of those, and they were both well over 5-pound trout from a river. So, he just used that side pressure. We've got video of him catching the big brown. I don't know if we have video of him catching the big rainbow, but when he's fighting the big brown, you can see the side pressure that he's using, because he uses it to just guide the fish away from any other obstacles and guide them into the net. And that's the last point I'd like to make here for you is, in fly fishing, when we are fighting fish, we're not moving and pulling on them like you do with conventional gear. Those rods are really heavy, or spinnier bait cast rods. They're heavy rods. You're using heavy line. You can really yank on a fish and really pull them. But in fly fishing, what you're trying to do is use just enough pressure to guide the fish to the net. Okay. That mindset shift, once you make it, can really be key in learning to let the fish run, let it tire itself out a little bit. And then when the fish has a little bit of a lull, that's when you go ahead and pull on it to help bring it towards the net. So hopefully that helps. Thanks so much for sending that question on in. Pete from Vermont has our next question, writes in and says, how do you cast a dry dropper rig? Well, Pete, it's real simple. Bigger, wide open loops. They are going to be your best friend, whether it's a dry dropper or a tandem nymph rig. Anytime you've got more than one fly on your rig, you want a nice, wide open loop. Okay, because when you've added a second fly to your rig, you haven't just put a second fly on there, you've also added length and weight to your rig. So that means your loops are going to take a little bit longer to completely straighten out on both casts. So that means you've got to wait just a little bit longer before you start each casting stroke. If you move too early, your line hasn't straightened out, you're going to end up with tangles. Okay. So what happens is you're going to end up slowing down. Those loops are going to open up just a little bit because you're going a little bit slower. Okay. And that's going to reduce the chance for tangles, but then it's going to help your timing because again, you've slowed down, you're letting the whole rig unfurl, get completely straight, and then move to the next part of the casting stroke. It can be a little bit of a mindset shift to make. Last night, when I was out fishing, like I shared earlier in the show, I was fishing a hopper. I actually had a hopper dropper on. I had a big hopper with a little Paragon underneath it. And it was the first time I've been on the water in like almost 2 weeks because I got sick. And so busy with work, so I just hadn't been out. And it took me a second even to slow down, open the loop up, because the first couple of casts I threw were really just not, they weren't accurate. They just piled on the water. I said, no. Hopper drop, you got to slow down just a little bit. Okay. So slow down, open those loops up. That's going to be your best friend for casting any sort of multi-fly rig. So thanks for that question, Pete. And with that, folks, we're going to wrap up the Q&A section of the show this week, but don't go anywhere because we've got the Live Real Life moment coming right up. Every week here at Untangled, we end the show by sharing a story and picture from folks who are out there on the water living real life. We love to get these stories, hear from y'all, and see what you're up to. It's really fun to see all the different adventures you're having out there on the water. So if you've got a live real life moment that you would like to share, there's a link to send those in down to the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's live real life moment is from Sean. My interest in fly fishing started with my dad. He was quite the angler in his day and involved himself to the point where he was building his own rods and taking entomology college courses. He passed away about 12 years ago, and I've held on to his stuff, knowing that over my lifetime I would one day get into the sport. Then a vacation trip to Arizona this past March put things into serious motion for me. I was discussing my trip with some guys at work, telling them I was going to Sedona to fish. One of my colleagues pulled me aside and said, "You know you're going to have to fish that on the fly, right?" With an opportunity like this, I knew I'd let myself down if I didn't. So I started cramming last fall, learning as much as possible, practicing my casts in the snow and tying my own flies. Fast forward to my spring Arizona trip. I made a few drifts in a deep pool with a number 12 Prince nymph and, yes, caught my first fish on the fly, a rainbow trout. Just as I hooked the fish, my fly box fell out of my vest and tumbled down the rocks and into the river. Later that day, I met another angler who asked me if I was missing a fly box. I explained what happened, and he mentioned there was another angler further upstream who was asking around earlier that day and was likely long gone. I would have been more upset, but since it was my first fish on the fly and knowing my dad was likely watching down on me, I consider it all worth it. If that angler is listening, enjoy the flies. After that Arizona trip, I've been obsessed. What I love the most about fly fishing is the joy of experiencing the results of patience and practice and knowing there's always something new to learn. I really enjoy being part of this community of ventures. Thank you. Well, Sean, that is a fantastic story. That is what Live Real Life is all about. You encapsulated it so wonderfully. Thank you so much for sending that on in. Very well put together story as well. And with that, folks, we are going to wrap the show up this week. Thank you so much for watching and listening to the whole show. It helps us out more than you know. And if you want to help us out even more, rate and review and subscribe to this show wherever you're listening to it. The more ratings and subscriptions we get, the more folks we can help live real life. That's our whole goal here at VFC. And tell everybody you know about the show. Send more questions in. We need as many questions as we can get from you guys. I love to hear and see what y'all are thinking. It helps me put together a good show every week. And speaking of good shows and good stuff, go have some fun on the water this week. Go enjoy yourselves. Go catch some fish. And until next week, live real life.